Hi.
Hi there. Welcome back to English for Specific Purposes, Level B2. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Daryl.
And I'm Miss Thათია. მოგესალმებით. კეთილი იყოს თქვენი დაბრუნება ჩვენს ტელესკოლაში. მე თათია ვარ, ეს კი დერილია. And what is the topic of today's lesson, Mr. Derill?
Well, something as interesting as we've talked about before, biology this time.
Oh, really? So interesting.
It's connected to medicine, isn't it? In a way.
Somehow it is. So I think that we are going to find out a lot about biology today. But before we move on to the lesson, I think that it's time to look at our agenda. What's on our agenda today, Mr. Derill?
Well, as usual, we should start with a discussion that will introduce some of the ideas that we're going to talk about. We'll have a look at a vocabulary list that's sort of related to the text that we will be reading later on. From there, we will have a look at the grammar section of today and then summarize everything and give you homework.
Very interesting. A good plan. But I think that before we move on to the lesson, we have to discuss some topics. First of all, let's talk about biology generally. What does the science study? What does biology study, Mr. Derill?
I would say it's the study of living organisms, the way they work, the way they look, the way they are inside. How they develop, how they evolve, right? It's really interesting. I think that all our life is really closely connected to biology, okay? And I think that it should be interesting for everyone to learn something about biology, right? It might be useful for health as well, if you know enough about biology. Yeah, you're sure. Now I think that it's time to move on to the first section of the lesson, which is the introduction of new words related to biology this time, and let's get started. What is the first word we have, Mr. Derill? Nucleus. Nucleus.
Nucleus is a noun, and in Georgian it is translated as birtvi, ujredis birtvi, okay? And can you give us more detail about the word, Mr. Derill?
The nucleus is the central part of the cell, the core of it.
Okay. And here's a very good example. DNA is stored in the nucleus of a cell. And the next word we have is gene. Gene is a noun, and in Georgian it is geni. Can you give us more details about the word, Mr. Derill?
Yeah, it's a very useful piece in the study of biology. Its gene is the part of the DNA in a cell that controls the physical environment, the behavior, and so on of an individual plant or animal or whatever the biological organism is.
Okay, so genes are transmitted from generation to generation, right?
Yes, as well.
Okay. And here we have an example. The scientists identified a defective gene, which is very important, okay? And the next word we have is evolution. Evolution is a noun, and in Georgian it is evoluția, right? So how would you define that word, Mr. Derill?
Evolution is the way in which living organisms change and develop over time. Usually we're talking millions of years, but a certain amount of time.
Okay. And here we have an example. We watched a documentary about the story of human evolution over the last 3 million years.
It's a long time.
The next word we have is?
A cell, a noun, and it is cell.
Cell is a noun, as Mr. Derill has said, and in Georgian it is translated as ujredi, a very important part. We all consist of cells. Okay, cell. Right? Can you give us a definition of the word, Mr. Derill?
It's basically the smallest basic unit of a plant or animal, the smallest part that's in you.
Okay. And we have a brilliant example here. The doctors discovered cancerous cells.
This is when cells work against you.
Yeah. And the next word we have is?
Tissue.
Tissue is a noun, and in Georgian it means xovili. Tissue. And how would you define that word, Mr. Derill?
It's related to the previous word, cells. It's a collection of cells together, and these form a tissue in a plant or an animal that is similar to each other, have the same purpose, and perform the same parts in activities in the animal.
Okay. And we have an example here. Soft tissue, such as flesh, allows X-rays through. So it means that X-ray can see through tissue, right?
And we're lucky that it can. Otherwise, we would never see what's happening
inside us.
Yeah.
Okay, right. And I think that we have finished with the first set of vocabulary and it's time to practice. We have sentences with gaps and we have to choose the right word for the sentences. And who's the first?
I'll go first.
Okay, well, I will read the sentence for you and you have to choose the right word, okay? The sentence looks like this. The, and then the gap, is the unit of which all living organisms are composed. What do you think can go here?
We spoke about that, though. If it's the unit, it's the fundamental unit, it's got to be a cell.
You're right, Mr. Derill. So the cell is the unit of which all living organisms are composed. Now it's my turn.
Here's your sentence. Scientists have identified the something that causes abnormal growth.
I think that I know the answer here, and it should be gene. And the sentence would sound like this. Scientists have identified the gene that causes abnormal growth.
Possibly cancerous.
And the next one is for you, and I will read the sentence. The drugs stimulate the damaged, then there is a space, into repairing itself. What do you think can go here?
Well, it has to be tissue, the next biggest part after cell.
You're right, Mr. Derill, and the sentence sounds like this. The drugs stimulate the damaged tissue into repairing itself. And the next sentence?
I will read it for you.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Something of an atom consists of neutrons, protons, and other particles.
And I know the answer. It should be nucleus. The nucleus of an atom consists of neutrons, protons, and other particles. And the last one for you. I think that it's very easy task.
I'll just read it, in fact.
Okay.
In the course of evolution, some birds have lost the power of flight.
And can you give us an example of a bird?
Penguins,
Yeah.
ostriches, emus.
Oh, really? So interesting. So evolution, it's really worth studying evolution of animals and species, right?
It takes a lot of study, but yeah, it's worth it.
That's what biologists do.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that it's time to move on to the reading part, but what do you think we have to do before we read the text?
You know what, we should have a look at some key words that will come up in the text.
We need to prepare for the text. So let's look at the first set of vocabulary. The first word we have is magnetic field. Magnetic field is a noun, and in Georgian it is magnituri veli. It's a little bit complicated, so can you give us more details about the word?
Yeah, magnetic field, an area around a magnet or something magnetic, which has the power to attract metals to itself.
Okay, and I have an example to make things clearer. So the Earth's magnetic field is constantly changing in both direction and intensity. And what is the next word, Mr. Derill?
It's a noun, and it's hatchling.
Hatchling. Hatchling is a noun, and in Georgian it is სულ ახალ გამოჩეკილი ბარტყი ბახალა მართვე და ამისთანები. Okay, hatchling, a noun. And how would you define that word, Mr. Derill? Is it a newborn bird?
Yeah, it's a sweet word. It's a young bird, or even animal sometimes, that has recently come out of an egg.
Okay, and here we have an example. It might even have eaten hatchling or juvenile dinosaurs. Sad story. Okay, now the next word we have is mature. Mature is an adjective, and in Georgian it is მომწიფებული, ზრდასრული. How would you define that word, Mr. Derill?
Well, it's the goal of every child to eventually become mature, to behave in a more emotionally and mentally appropriate and adult way.
Okay. And here's an example. Humans take longer to mature than most other animals. And it's true.
I've seen it.
Okay. And the next word we have is adapt.
Adapt, yeah.
Adapt is an adjective, and in Georgian it is დახელოვნებული, გაწაფული. Adapt. So how would you define that word, Mr. Derill?
This is when you have the natural ability to do something. If you're adept at something, you have the knack or the ability to do it.
Okay, thank you. And here is an example. He was highly adept at avoiding trouble. It's a very good skill, isn't it?
It's a very, very useful skill.
Yes. Okay, and what is the next word, Mr. Derill?
Breed. The noun, breed.
Breed is a noun, and in Georgian it is dzishi. Okay, so is it the same as species?
Yes, close, but even closer in scope. It's the particular type of a plant or animal within that plant or animal.
Oh.
For example, I can ask you this. What is your favorite breed of dog?
Okay, now I've got it. And I have an example. The new breed is under observation.
Mm-hmm.
And the next word we have is frequency. Frequency is a noun, and in Georgian it is sikshire. Frequency. Can you give us more details about the word, Mr. Derill?
Yeah, there's the technical definition of frequency, which is the number of times something happens within a particular period, and also a more general definition, like the fact of something happening often in a large amount of times.
Okay. And here's an example. You can't hear waves of such a high frequency. And I think that we are ready to read the text, but before we read the text, let's discuss a very interesting thing. Just generally,
for example, how do animals navigate in and around their habitats?
We know the story that birds leave their natural habitats in winter, go to some other countries, and then return back to the same country, right? How do they do this? Mm-hmm. How do they navigate? Do they have any special skills for that?
Not just birds, turtles, I believe, do so, and fish of certain kinds.
Really? I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's really interesting. How do they do this? What skills do they have?
We should find out.
We have to read the text and find out. So I think that the text will be very interesting. Okay, let's get started. How do animals navigate? As a young hatchling, a female sea turtle leaves the beach where she was born in search of food. As she matures, she travels great distances, perhaps even crossing vast oceans. When she reaches adulthood, she finds a mate. As the pregnant turtle prepares to lay her eggs, she is somehow drawn instinctively back, perhaps from many hundreds of miles away, to the very same beach where she herself was hatched decades earlier. How is this incredible homecoming possible?
Yeah, it's fascinating how a turtle has the sense.
And the answer to this question might be in this second section of the text.
Let's find out. Scientists have long been puzzled by the mysterious navigation skills of certain birds and animals. One of the most mysterious stories is that of the sea turtles. After decades of research, it is now believed that sea turtles learn and remember the particular magnetic address of their birthplace, helping them to be able to read the Earth's magnetic field and recall the magnetic characteristics of their place of birth. Since the Earth's magnetic field changes slightly over time, turtles can use the information to find their way back to the area of their birthplace, but not the exact spot. Once they are in the general vicinity, turtles probably rely on sight and smell to choose the best place to lay their eggs.
Okay, so it's all about magnetic field, it turns out, right?
That's a good sense to have.
Okay. Now, let's move on to the next section, Mr. Derill. Another navigation genius is the homing pigeon. Moving through the sky rather than the sea, homing pigeons are famous for their ability to find their way home. They can fly hundreds of miles over unfamiliar territory without becoming disorientated. Scientists have studied homing pigeons for many years, and now with global positioning satellite GPS devices, they can track the exact routes that the birds take. While it has been found that pigeons may use the sight of familiar landmarks or smells, they only do this when they are near their final destination. However, pigeons seem adept at using a variety of methods for navigation. Like sea turtles, their main tools are their knowledge and memory of Earth's magnetic fields. This map helps them determine where they are in relation to their home.
It'd be great if we humans had that magnetic field sense.
the same sense. Yeah.
It would be great if we did. Maybe the GPS is our way of mimicking that magnetic sense.
Yes.
Okay, it seems that pigeons use the easiest and most reliable method in each circumstance and are very adept at changing their navigational methods to suit the situation. A 10-year study conducted by scientists at Oxford University showed that some breeds of pigeons actually follow roads and highways, turning at intersections as they fly, even if there's a shorter way to reach the destination. Another navigational tool that pigeons use is infrasound. These are very low-frequency sounds that can travel thousands of miles and can only be heard by some animals. Infrasound can be generated by ocean waves, for example, and the constant presence of these ocean waves can help pigeons figure out where they are.
It's an interesting fact. So I've got the answer to a question that has been bothering me for a long time. So magnetic field and some different kind of infrasound.
These are almost like superpowers that they have that we don't have.
Yes, unfortunately we don't, but they have. But we have some things that they don't, so we can just...
Intellect.
Yes. Okay, it can just reassure us, right? Okay. Well, and I think that it's time to practice and find out how well we remember the text. So we will read some sentences and we have to decide whether the statements are true or false. And here is the first one. Sea turtles return to the same place where they were hatched to lay eggs.
The whole text was about that? Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. You are right, Mr. Dere, because we read, as the pregnant turtle prepares to lay her eggs, she is somehow drawn instinctively back, perhaps from many hundreds of miles away, to the very same beach where she herself was hatched decades earlier.
Here's another sentence, and you can tell me if it's true or false.
Oh, yes, I'm ready.
Sea turtles only use their sight and smell to find places.
No. This is definitely not true. It's false, because I remember we read, it's now believed that sea turtles learn and remember the particular magnetic address of their birthplace. Next statement is for you, Mr. Derill. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Home pigeons are skilled at using different methods of navigation. What do you think?
Well, the fact that you mentioned different, I think it's got to be true.
And you are right, Mr. Derill, because we read, pigeons seem adept at using variety of methods for navigation. So it seems that you remember the text quite well.
Well, let's find out if you remember this, this sentence.
I'm sure I also remember the text quite well.
Infrasound is high-frequency sound that can be heard by all animals.
Let me think.
It's tricky.
Yes. But I think that it's false, because I remember we read another navigational tool that pigeons may use is infrasound. These are very low frequency sounds that can travel thousands of miles and can only be heard by some animals.
There was the key phrase, by some animals.
And not all the animals.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that we have finished the reading section, and it's time to move on to grammar. And the topic of today's grammar is noun clauses, or embedded questions, okay? So these are questions. When we want to sound more polite, we usually use this kind of questions, okay? And now let's find out how we can form these polite questions, okay? We can use embedded questions to ask a question more politely or indirectly, or to talk about what someone knows or remembers.
Embedded questions begin with expressions such as, can you tell me? Do you know? And I was wondering, here's an example. Do you know where those things are from originally? And it's
instead
asking,
of saying, where are they from originally?
Exactly.
I would sound more polite if I start a sentence like this. Do you know where those things are from originally? Okay?
To transform normal questions into embedded questions, we use a statement word order, such as the following. Go ahead, you can read us the example.
I was wondering why so many people move to cities. In the question form, it would be like this: why do so many people move to cities? Here we have auxiliary verb do, but as we can see in embedded questions, we don't. So we just say, I was wondering why so many people move to cities. So it looks like a statement, right?
So this way makes you sound more fluent.
Yeah.
Well, in embedded questions with be, the verb changes position. And in yes, no questions as well, we use if or whether in place of question words.
And here's an example. Peter wants to know whether there is one main cause of urbanization. And the question would sound like this: is there one main cause of urbanization? Here we have verb to be, which is not at the beginning of the sentence anymore. It changes its place, as we have said. And also it is a yes-no question. Is there one main cause of urbanization? So it means that we need to introduce the question, we need whether or if. And in this case we have whether. And the question sounds like this: Peter wants to know whether there is one main cause of it, right? And I think that we have finished with the theoretical part, and it's time to practice. So we have normal questions, and we have to make into more polite ones, okay? Let me try. Can I?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Here is the sentence, the question. Are you interested in animal life?
I would say the sentence politely like this: can you tell me if you are interested in animal life?
Very polite of you.
The next one for you. Where do wild animals live? And I want you to start the sentence with, I was wondering.
Okay, well, in that case, I was wondering where wild animals live.
You're right, Mr. Derill. And the next one for me.
Here's your question. What is the reason for the extinction of some species? And I'd like you to use, I'd like to know.
And I would say this like this: I'd like to know what the reason for extinction of some species is. You know I love grammar.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next one for you. Is it possible to save the endangered species? And I want you to start the question with, can you tell me? And don't forget that this is yes-no question, so you need to change the position of verb to be, and also you need a special word to use here. So how would you say the sentence?
Oh, well, I would say the following. Can you tell me if it is possible to save endangered animals?
You're right, Mr. Derill. And this was the last sentence. It's time to wrap up the lesson, Mr. Derill.
Well, Ms. Thaddeus, as you know, we spoke about vocabulary words that were relevant to the reading text. We moved from there to the reading text, and from there we spoke about our grammar of the day, noun clauses, embedded questions.
Okay, very interesting. And we have come to the final part, which is homework. What will be the homework for the next lesson?
Well, we would like you to write about interesting habits and characteristics of animals.
Oh, so interesting. So many people have animals, and they have experience with animals, and they might know a lot of interesting things about animals, right? And where can the homework be uploaded, Mr. Derill?
It can be uploaded to the address you see on the screen, and you can also find sample homework there.
So I think that the only thing we can do now is say goodbye to the audience and wait for the next lesson.
And we hope that you will keep learning out there and keep watching.
So stay with us and keep on learning. Bye.
Until next week, goodbye.